right, welcome everyone. This is an episode of Secondhand Religion. I'm Ryan Danker. I'm the Associate Professor of Church History and Methodist Studies at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. And today I'm excited to have two friends here who, with me, we've served for a number of years on the United Methodist United States Catholic, what is it, Conference of Catholic Bishops Dialogue. Normally, we don't say out the full name. We say the Methodist Catholic Dialogue, but it's very specific to the United States. And so I'm really excited to have Father Drew Christiansen here from Georgetown University. He is the Distinguished Professor of Global Ethics. And also to have Bishop David Talley, who is the Bishop of the Diocese of Memphis. Very excited, really excited to have the two of you here as we talk about the Methodist Catholic Dialogue. What's it like? What is it for? What was your experience with it? People have asked me questions about this throughout the years, and I've been involved for 6 years. I know that the two of you have been involved with ecumenism for many years yourself. But I want to start out, Drew, I'm going to give you the first question. What launched your interest in all things ecumenical?
Well, I have to say I had a very ecumenical mother. I mean, she was raised in a Catholic family and was a leader even as a teenager in her parish. But she had, she didn't have the same kind of restrictive attitudes that some of our Irish American friends had about meeting up with Protestants and so on. My father was a convert from Episcopalianism. But Mom, would go to meetings of in later life of Church Women United and other groups like that, where lay women had associations, and she wasn't afraid of going to a service at a Protestant church. So, unlike some of her contemporaries, so started out that basis, and then when I was looking at religious orders, as a high schooler, I first looked at the Graymore Friars, whose mission is ecumenism, church unity, but decided on the Jesuits. And I have to say that my education in the Jesuits really moved me along that route, partly because Woodstock College, which was the seminary, moved from Maryland in the countryside into the heart of New York City at Columbia University, where we were united both with the Union Theological Seminary and Jewish Theological, the premier Jewish seminary in Manhattan. And then later on at graduate school at Yale, the method that was practiced there was called interconfessional education, so that you had to know your own denominational approach to a particular issue in theology to be able to explain it to others. And everybody were reading people on all sides. But the dialogue as a result of that was extremely good. And then when I got to Berkeley to teach, my first teaching assignment, it was very much the same kind of thing. It was an ecumenical consortium, but I discovered the students would say, well, you taught me Lutheranism, you taught me Methodism better than my professors. I understand it better now. And I was teaching just war or something. And students would say, well, what about this? I remember the first time students asked me about Methodism, and I didn't know much about Methodism. I went researching, and I came back and said, oh, that's why we do that. I didn't know that. So that was all there. And then finally, in the first dialogue I was in, the International Catholic Mennonite Dialogue, I just had a wonderful experience in prayer. We're having an evening prayer saying, look, my whole education has moved me here. Even I taught for a while at Notre Dame, and dialogue there with John Howard Yoder, who was the leading Mennonite theologian in the late 20th century. And that was the reason I was so effective in that particular dialogue. So I felt that the hand of providence had been there leading me along with all these ecumenical experiences right up to that moment. So the Lord's hand is there all along, I think.
I love that. I love that. Some of my students have accused me of describing Catholicism better to them than other traditions. Bishop David, I want to give you the second question, in part because of your new role with the USCCB, which I'm kind of hinting at that I'd like you to talk about. What is the goal of the ecumenical movement? And if you want to talk about the first question, you can do that as well.
Okay. Well, I think it's great to be here, Ryan, and for Father Drew. We, for your viewers, we work together very, very well and developed a deep friendship and a love for each other in the Lord, though there's a difference in our communions. At any rate, I think it was November 19, it might have been 20, but with the COVID fog, and we don't remember dates very well. But by the body of bishops that come together twice a year, I was elected to be the chair of the Bishops' Committee for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs. And this November, I took over the chairmanship. And we will have our first meeting, a Zoomed meeting, tomorrow. The purpose of the committee is, as disciples of Jesus, to realize what the prayer of Jesus said in John 17:21. He was praying to his Father and our Father and asking that they, the followers of Jesus, that we, those of you watching this, that we are one, as the Father is in the Son and the Son is in the Father. He was drawing us to a dynamic of love, a Trinitarian love, a relational love. And so that's what our committee does, both for all who are one in baptism, that's the ecumenical part, but also those who have a longing for the Lord, for the three Abrahamic communions, and then for those who are seeking the Lord in a variety of ways. That's the interreligious affairs. So I'm a chair of that, and we work as Catholic bishops and Catholic theologians, trying to understand how the Lord is calling us to be one, according to the path of Jesus.
You mentioned mentioned the friendship and the love that developed in the course of the dialogue, this particular dialogue, and it's very true. It's and I should tell our viewers the dialogue included more than just the three of us. In fact, there were four. Of course, it's funny. I don't like the language. we often use the language of sides. There was a bishop and four theologians or experts on the Methodist side and on the Catholic side, and then staff on both sides. It's funny though, we never sat in sides. We sat together.
Right.
Very integrated in our approach, which was something that I think spoke to the affection that developed with the group.
And in that being together, on both sides, in quote, some, maybe the majority, were clerics ordained, but some were not. So you had lay professionals and ordained professionals, and all of us disciples together talking about commonality. Through the Holy Spirit, what do we hold in common in the name of Jesus?
Right. Yeah. No, it's definitely a rich experience, and that leads right to the question number 3. And actually, I'm going to start with this one, and I'll let the two of you share. In terms of high points of our dialogue, and this last dialogue I think was 6 years, which is quite a long dialogue session. I should say to the viewers that the United Methodists and the Roman Catholics have been in dialogue now for decades, not just 6 years, but for decades. And in fact, is it 40 or is it 50 years?
50.
50. Right. So the dialogue runs in rounds. So we were in the most recent round, and it was a 6-year round. But I'm going to describe a high point for me. And now the camaraderie and the love and affection was definitely the high point of the entire experience. But in terms of an event, I think the high point for me was when I gave you all a tour of Philadelphia, the historic aspects of Philadelphia from in terms of Anglican and Methodist history. And that was just a lot of fun to drag a group of clergy and academics around Philly, talking about the Wesleys and talking about the birth of Methodism and its various forms, especially American Methodism. That was a highlight. Some people might say that some of my baked goods were the highlight, but that's, But Drew, what was the highlight for you?
Well, I'd say that the highlight, I think, of this last round in particular was say that the spiritual friendship that we cultivated with one another, that John Crossan, who was the staff person on the Catholic side, encouraged us to do, and that's how you and I got to be friends, Ryan. And I really felt we drew a lot of strength, and the peculiar rich quality of this last dialogue was a result of that spiritual friendship. I'd say too that I was just astonished at the end, although we had to, explain one thing or another for Catholics or Methodists, that our expression of our common faith that we did in our final document came so easily and so naturally to one another, and we were able to really contribute to one another so easily in that process. It was just a marvelous experience, and it still reads beautifully, and I encourage everyone to pick it up and read it, because I think it's a wonderful testament to where American Catholics and Methodists are today in their faith.
Bishop, did you have a highlight from?
Many. One of them would be listening to the men and the women theologians on the Methodist side and the Catholic side. I've been a priest now for about 31 years. I came into ministry middle-aged, and I've been a bishop for 7 years. And so though I'm with people, men and women, boys and girls all the time, when I think theologically or express myself theologically outside the homily, it's with priests or bishops. But I had men and women sitting across the table, either in conversation or over a meal, talking about in great depth the mystery of Christ and the mystery of God's love for us in a way that was so inspiring. And the fathers, the desert fathers that I read, they read. And there was such commonality. Another high point for me was from you, Ryan, and the others too. I learned about John Wesley. I read several of your books, several of the books published by our team. And John Wesley was just this extraordinary man who had a great spirituality of the heart. Yeah. And that's kind of how I come into the mystery of Christ's love, is through the heart. And I found a commonality with him. I think, you don't know if you remember this, but I never knew much about my granddad. But my granddad, I was mostly from a Baptist family, but my grandfather on my dad's side was Methodist. Mm-hmm. And he was a sweet, gentle man. And so that was hearing theologians, men and women, cleric and lay, that was wonderful. The way what Drew said, how we came together and talked about complex issues. These are professional theologians talking about complex issues, but not in a siloed way, or in a defensive, guarded way, but in an open-hearted way about this is the tradition as I understand it. How do you understand it? So those things gave me great hope for the prayer of Jesus bringing us together.
Ryan, I'd add that one of the high points for me that kept moving on through the whole course of this last round was appreciating more Wesley's hymnody as a source of theology.
Yes.
I remember in my very first dialogue meeting in the 7th round, that's the previous round, we were going to talk about creation and Eucharist. And since I had staffed the U.S. Bishop's environment pastoral, I was asked to make a presentation about that. And our Methodist colleague from Wesley got up and said, "Well, we don't have that kind of theology. We don't have that kind of theological base. Our base is the legislation from the quadrennial conventions, but then there's this very, very rich source of the hymnody of Wesley, which I was familiar with, but my appreciation for it just grew up as a source of theology. It's just wonderful, and it's great Catholic theology too."
Let me say yes. Forgive me, Ryan, but this was Karen. This is one of our associates. Is a professor and a musician, accomplished musician, author, and she didn't correct. It wasn't in a correcting way, but she was. When I told her, I was just clueless about the theology done through Charles Wesley's hymn. She said, "David, how and then she began to explain, and then it hit me when I've heard people say, sing all 4 verses.
Yes.
There's a reason.
Yes.
You're doing theology. You're offering through the art of music. Yeah, you're offering revelatory truth in 4 verses. And you learn it easier that way. It's easier to memorize that way. But at least from my point of view, as growing up as a Baptist boy and then as a Catholic convert, it never occurred to me to think of the songs as revelatory, and they are.
I mean, I'm sitting here and I have a copy of John and Charles Wesley's Eucharistic hymn sitting right next to me. I just gave a lecture yesterday to my Methodist students about the Eucharistic hymnody of the early Wesleyan movement. And even Methodists are not fully aware of the treasure that they have. They were blown away by this collection. And that's just one particular collection. But yeah, that's one of, I love you. Well, I'm having a warmed heart experience here, just listening to the two of you talking about John Wesley. So let's go with low points. I'll start this one. I won't say an event. I don't think there was a particular event that was a low point, but there is a sense of, how do I put this? When we gather as believers and we can see Christ in one another, and yet we are divided, there is a sadness that's involved. And there were certain meetings where that sadness was heavier. At least for me, it's a heavy sadness to think that I'm talking to my brother who's filled with Christ. I'm talking to my sister who is filled with Christ. And yet there is some form of division between us. And I think that is a difficulty that, well, I wish more Christians had to face it so that we could understand and appreciate Christ in our brothers and sisters in other communions. But that would be if I was going to list a low point, that would be my approach. What are your thoughts?
Papa Drew? Well, I'd add to that it's particularly a low point at the Eucharist because Methodists, like Catholics, believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And so the chief concern that we have about sharing the Eucharist is that, and the fact that, other differences would cause us not to be able to share the Eucharist is painful. I'd say that another personal one for me was, I got very excited learning about John Wesley's Holy Conferencing. You'll remember. And Ryan, you introduced me to the authors who were working on that, and I saw it very much like some things the Jesuits had done and still do. And so I wrote that up. It appeared in the Journal of Ecumenical Studies. But I was disappointed, I guess, one, that it failed at the last convention to become a modality for the UMC to deal with very difficult issues when it was proposed as a way of doing things at the last convention. And that, in a sense, I introduced it, discussed it as something we had in common, but it didn't go anywhere. But it seems to me that it is something to build on in the future.
Well, for me, the experience was so overwhelmingly positive that I didn't think much about low points, but there is a low point, and it's having what you said, Ryan, sitting across the table in discussion, in debate even, professionals looking at the same data and seeing different tangents. So still, there was a commonality among us there. At meals, it was the same way. But when we came to Eucharist, and we agreed, because I was uncomfortable with a kind of a blanket pretending, sharing that when we're not completely unified. And so we agreed as a body that we would have a Eucharist, a Methodist prayer of Eucharist, and a Catholic Mass, a prayer of Eucharist. But we weren't all together. That's one piece of the low point. But the real low point was this, and it's hard to get your viewers to understand this, but when you're in an experience over months and months and months, time after time of meeting someone and develop friendships and develop a trust, an interior intuitional trust that they know who you know. They know who you know, and you are known by who they are known by. When you have a sense of that oneness in the Lord, and then I began to think as a bishop in Memphis, as the head of this organization for the Bishops' Conference, how difficult it is to talk to anyone about this. People are not beating down my door wanting to talk about the ecumenical movement. I will be beating down their doors, asking them to think about it. And that's kind of a low point. After I would leave our meeting, coming back to reality, when we only think about our parish or our diocese, and I'd go beyond it to see the whole that Jesus wants to come and redeem. Hope that makes some sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I had a lot of people coming to me and asking me questions, mainly friends who had been involved in ecumenism in some form. Those of us who went to the divinity school at Duke and were shaped by Jeffrey Wainwright kind of had ecumenism injected into our veins. And I think that's one of his lasting gifts to the church, that there were so many of us that received that charism from Jeffrey Wainwright. There's a wonderful Roman Catholic way of putting it. Methodists don't normally talk like that. But this leads right into the next portion, the next section of questions, though. What does this look like? How did we develop these friendships, and how were you able to see that the one sitting across from you, regardless of communion, may in fact did in fact know Christ, and you could see it.
May I start?
Yep, please.
But it's a little bit with my own. This is a small portion of my own story. I grew up as a Baptist boy, and within a Baptist family. But as a 14-year-old teenager, I walked away from organized faith. I came back to faith in college, like lots of people do, questioning but thinking about it, and had an adult conversion experience of that God is alive, that God is in love with me, that God speaks through this person Jesus, all those things, and I became, in the end, I became Roman Catholic, and a zealous Roman Catholic, and an apologetic Roman Catholic. And when I was ordained, I was that way, and I was lots more black and white than I am today, meaning I'm a zealous Roman Catholic, and I did not listen to others that didn't accept everything that I accepted as part of God's revelatory heart. That's how I started as a young priest, but it changed pretty quickly. Working with people in mixed families, in quote, seeing the goodness in people, and then reclaiming the holiness in my family, that's mostly Baptist, with a Baptist brother, and seeing how authentic he is and his children are as disciples of Jesus. Though we don't share some fundamental things, we share him, the Lord Jesus. And so that's what happened to me. Looking how this happens, it happened when my blinders were taken away from a siloed vision of what my work is as a priest, taking care of these Catholics and drawing strong walls against those who want to take away from our faith, to seeing faith as a good bit broader and more inviting to others wanting to come and be in love as we are in love.
That's a beautiful testimony. And Wesleyans like the word testimony. I know Baptists do too.
Yeah.
I do want to tell the viewers a little bit about how these meetings function. Not too much. We don't want to get to nuts and bolts too much. They might get bored. But the first meeting of this dialogue was actually in Manhattan. And if I remember right, neither of you were there.
Right.
um, it was in Manhattan. At that point, the United Methodist Women still had, I always called it a Methodist bed and breakfast. There.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was owned by the United Methodist Women. They sold it. Unfortunately, it was across the street from a great bakery. But yeah, and we had at that point we had two different bishops who were leading. Bishop Bill Skilstead from Spokane, Skilstead, there we go, and then Bishop Mike Watson, who is the retired bishop of Atlanta. And at that point, we spent the majority of that meeting simply getting to know each other. And I was surprised because I'd been asked to be on this dialogue by a friend that I went to graduate school with, Dr. Glenn Messer. And so he invited me onto this dialogue, and I said, sure. And I thought, oh, we're going to go up to Manhattan and we're going to debate theology. That's what we're going to do. Right. We're going to talk about, Marian dogmas and Wesleyan, perfectionism. That's what we're going to talk about. None of that came up at all. In fact, that first meeting was when we were introduced to the idea of spiritual friendship that Father Drew brought up. And I was dumbfounded how much time we were spending getting to know each other. The second meeting, I don't remember where it was, but we started to get into some of the work of creating the document that Father Drew has mentioned. And I should say to the viewers, the document that we worked on was primarily aimed at helping Methodists and Catholics who experience things together in life, such as weddings and funerals and other things. I told the Council of Bishops of the Methodist Church, they asked me about the dialogue, and I said, well, it just appears Catholics keep falling in love with Methodists. So we needed to produce a document to help them understand how they can go about this liturgically. We are being joined by Dr. Kimberly Belcher.
Always a good sign when the first word I hear is liturgical.
That's right. Well, welcome, Kim. We're recording, and you're more than welcome to be a part of this. This, for our viewers, this is Dr. Kimberly Belcher from Notre Dame. Kim, what is your full title?
I am an associate professor of theology at Notre Dame.
Kimberly was one of the people that the women that you fall in love with in their love for God. Extraordinary love for God, profound understanding of liturgy and liturgical prayer. And so I just sat and listened to her and was wrapped up in her love for God. And that was such a good thing.
Absolutely. All right. So we're going to move on to another question. Really, what were your hopes of entering the dialogue? I've already said that I thought we would enter into great debates about theology, but really we were spending time getting to know each other and then working on particular documents together, which is very rich and fruitful in and of itself. But I'm going to throw this question to Kim. What were your hopes going into the dialogue with United Methodists?
Well, ecumenism has always been important to me. So from my work from the very beginning, I was really interested in increasing church unity. And so I was aware coming into the dialogue of how much unity had already been expressed on baptism and the Eucharist, which are really kind of the heart of the work that I do. And so really what I wanted out of the dialogue was to figure out how we could take that history of agreement and really push it forward and make it part of people's lives.
So you're referring to baptism, Eucharist, and ministry as a groundwork for that?
And the bilateral dialogues that the Catholic and Methodist Church had already published before we started to meet.
Yeah. Drew, I'm going to throw this question to you as well. What was your hope going into a dialogue with the United Methodists?
Well, I think it was a rather procedural hope in a sense, but hoping that we could glean from the last 50 years of dialogue, the kind of fruits of our predecessors, and that traditionally every 10 years the dialogues looked back and kind of summed up where they had been. And I think it was very fortunate we decided to go a different route, and we decided, no, we're going to do a catechesis for Catholics and Methodists, and then provide them with some liturgical resources that they can use in common as a way to promote this. Because one of the overall themes of the year was reception, and we thought that a doctrinal statement based on the old catechetical method of the Creed and Our Father and the commandments would be the best way to go, and then we'd do these other liturgical elements that Kim can talk about. And I think in the end that was a much better way to go. I think that's the way we really harvested the fruit in a way that not only we can feel it, but the people who use those documents can feel it as well. It's not just in the head, it's in the heart and the soul as well.
Right. Yeah. And Father Drew, you mentioned the documents. I want to remind the viewers that these are documents for that really outline the patterns of worship or liturgy for weddings. Methodist and a Catholic are wed. These documents can help both the pastor and the priest to figure out what to do with these two. And then also with funerals, because families engage together in times of grief, and their traditions bring different riches to that moment. A lot of this, though, it's the question of unity is still something that is undergirding all of this work, is it not? And I think I still remember Father Al Baca, who was on the dialogue at one point, my friend from Orange County, California. He told me, he said, the reason we do this is because and he was speaking from the Roman Catholic perspective, he said, we are interested in unity. Bishop David, I'm going to let you start with this. What might that unity look like? If you want to go on record of describing what that might look like. Otherwise, you can throw the question to Dr. Belcher.
The professional. Well, I'll start, and then she and he can take over. First, I don't know. I can't see what the Holy Spirit will do in the end, but I know what it looks like now. And what it looks like now, though it's not fully realized, is what we have been talking about for the last 30 minutes. For different cultures, liturgical cultures to come together, people with different backgrounds and educational formations to come together, and the baseline being Jesus of Nazareth, find a way to open their hearts to one another. All that happens after that, and how we deal with 2,000 years of living the life of Jesus, that is for people like Father Drew and Dr. Belcher. Pastors will listen to them and pray with them, and then seek to live a unity that the Holy Spirit will realize according to His time and place. So I basically punted giving it to the Holy Spirit.
Oh, I think the Holy Spirit can manage that. Kim, did you want to add any insights? What might that unity look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know more about what it won't look like. It won't look like one group of people overriding and overruling another. That's what we know it won't look like. And I think for a long time, the fear that that's what unity would look like has really prevented us from moving forward. And so that's one of the reasons why, in my opinion, the best way for us to go forward is actually like one step at a time. Like, don't look too far ahead. Take one step at a time in unity with one another. Let our hearts stay in community and love with one another. And don't try to pigeonhole this process into something that has a determined endpoint. We know it will mean sharing the life of Christ in common. It will mean breaking bread in unity with one another. It will mean, living out our love for one another in many different ways. But we don't know an institutional structure that will make that work for us, and that's okay, in my opinion.
If I can follow up, Kim,
Yes.
A picture of it for me, present tense, is when you see a picture of Francis and Bartholomew. The Orthodox and the Latin Church have 2,000 years of history under their belts, and yet these two old men, two bishops coming together, they talk about the simple things of God's love, and they're walking together as brothers, and their theologians will assist as we move together the bodies. But as Kim said, we do it a step at a time, but holding each other's hands, walking out as a pilgrimage, walking together.
That's a beautiful description. It's almost an Emmaus description, isn't it? Well, I'm curious about this next question. And I know my viewers are going to be curious about this too, especially the Methodists. As a Catholic, how would you describe Methodism? And this one's going to go first to Father Drew, because I'm curious how he would describe Methodism.
Well, I describe it as a holiness movement that is especially focused on the congregational or parish community and their accountability to one another. I think to just contrast it with Catholicism, I think Catholicism has a strong, we share together a doctrine of perfection. I want to make that clear. It's one of the things I would hope that the dialogue would approach in the future, is that sharing in the doctrine of perfection. But I think Catholicism puts more emphasis on the sacraments and God's actions in the sacraments rather than our experience of grace in the warmed heart. It's not that that's not there, but that's part of spirituality and not so much as sacramental theology. And I think with American Methodism, however, there's the element of the frontier that enters in, which makes it distinctive. And it's not pure Wesley. It's the American frontier that's kind of shaped the direction and the shape and the style, so that this deliberate, where theology is not the basis of things, as it might have been in Wesley's hymns, but rather these conventions in which people bring all sorts of issues and resolutions are made and adopted, and they become the backbone of the community. That's a different kind of dimension. Where, Catholics do come together in synods and councils and so on, but usually theology is an important part of how you get there. And in that very first encounter in the seventh dialogue, I was just astounded that we don't have a theology we work from in this kind of thing. But it seems to me that so you can't look at American Methodism, at least. I'm not speaking for British Methodism or for Methodism elsewhere, without thinking of the American frontier and that congregational spirit, which kind of mirrors to some extent the structure of the early republic.
Yeah, now that I'm gonna hire you to teach my Methodism classes, Drew. And of course, you named one of the biggest challenges I face as an originalist Wesleyan, dealing with my American Methodist brethren, whom I love. Kim, I'm going to throw this question to you as well. How would you describe Methodism as a Catholic?
Well, since Drew's given us such a great foundation and talked about polity, I'll talk about its influence on worship and really American spirituality as a whole. Like, there's probably no tradition that's had an equal influence on American spirituality as a whole and traditions of worship as Methodism has. And so, particularly from my perspective, the importance of congregational song to create a change in the heart, to create a desire for the good, a desire for the holy. And the way that those congregational songs get arranged in public worship in such a way as to create conversion and the experience of conversion has been a real gift that's come from the Methodist tradition and has actually influenced all of the traditions of Christianity in North America and even beyond. So that's really an exciting thing to look at.
No, that's wonderful. You've got "And Can It Be" in my head now, right? My chains fell off, my heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. Yeah, this is.
And we've stolen your songs, you know, as of so many other traditions.
Yes.
So we get to experience that too.
Well, please steal them, because remember that the Charles Wesley was an adamant Anglican. So he would even say that we might have stolen them. So that's fine. The next question I'm going to give to Bishop David. As a Catholic, what do you think Methodism has to offer the larger church?
Kim alluded to it a bit, and so did Father Drew. The renewal, conversion of heart, metanoia, in this season of Holy Lent. It's a good word to focus on. A conversion of heart within worship, within the community, longing to be one in the Lord through hymnology, through the liturgy, and we've lost a bit of that. Before we began filming, we were talking about how our parishes, using this kind of virtual effort, platform for worship, we hear the word, we hear the spoken word, but we can't feel the sense of community singing together. We can't feel the sense, can't smell, can't be with a body, an embodied spirituality. Methodism, the little part that I know from you guys during the dialogues, is much different than my Baptist growing up, which was really the liturgy of the word, the power of the spoken, and the best Baptist churches had the best preachers. It wasn't always the best choir or the best organist; it was the best preacher. Methodism has, for me, a bit better or more fluid equality among the sung theology and the priest theology, and that's what we Catholics need to have too in our worship.
Yeah, I love listening to you guys describe Methodism. This is interesting because this is not something we do on the dialogue. We were much more focused on documents and producing something for Methodists and Catholics in the pews, as we said. I do want. So the last question I have for us, I want to take the time to let all three of you address the question as we wrap up our time together. And actually, I'll start to say what my hope is for the Methodist Catholic Dialogue. My hope is that it continues and actually expands to include other forms of Methodism. That's one thing that's a reality in this country, and moving forward might become even more of a reality, is that there will be Methodisms. Actually, there are Methodisms, and so to see the AME and the AME Zion and the CME and maybe the Nazarenes and Free Methodists and the other members of the Holiness Movement be able to dialogue with the Roman Catholics, I think it would be a rich experience for all of them, mainly because the dialogue introduced me even more to the richness and the beauty of the Catholic Church and of this and of the witness that you have for Jesus Christ. And I think as more Wesleyans, let's just say, I'll just use the word Wesleyans, see that, my hope is that the unity that we have had on this dialogue as friends, as brothers and sisters who share the love of Christ with each other, that might spread. That's my hope, coming from a Wesleyan perspective. But what do you think? Well, Kim, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Father Drew, and then we'll go to Bishop David. You can wrap it up there with the last question. What are your hopes for Catholic and Methodist dialogue moving forward?
Yeah. So, I'll never, so part of this for me comes from what I think we have to learn from each other and learn together. And so I won't forget actually one of the very first meetings of the dialogue, when we talked about the Methodist Church's sense of themselves as a part of the larger church. And I think that kind of open vision, that sees a larger picture than is currently visible, like an eschatological vision, a vision of kind of what's coming, even if we can't see how to fully realize it. Like that's what I see us learning together, is in a bigger way, what does it mean to be a church together, not two churches alongside one another, but one church together. And I know that's kind of a big picture answer to the question, but I think reflecting on what it means to be Christ's church together, that's a more concrete instance of what I would like to see us do more of in the future.
Father Drew?
Well, there are two things. The first I've already mentioned, and that is that I really think both churches would gain from doing a retrieval together of their traditions of the idea of perfection in Christian theology and spirituality. I think it's something we share in common, the notion of sanctification. It's not shared by other traditions, mainline Protestant traditions, and it seems to me that it helps both of us keep to the center of our Christian faith, if we can really retrieve that. And then partially in a way to develop that as a sustained thing, but also as I think an ecclesiological development. I really think that understanding that small communities have a place to play within the parish and in the diocese and the larger church is very important. The Synod for America talked about the parish as the community of communities and movements. And I think that's really an important definition. We always think of it as territorial. And I think it's when you see it as groups of people coming together because they have common interests or they're part of a common movement, it begins to come alive. And Paul VI and Pope Francis have both drawn their attention to the small communities in which people can discern the signs of the times together and then take action to bring them about. And I think both churches would come alive if we develop those communities of discernment and Methodists develop holy conferencing. I think both churches would be, as a real reality, informing the life of the church. I think both churches would grow alive together.
Bishop David.
For your viewers, if we had our entire dialogue together, you would see men and women equally divided, Catholics and Methodists. And I want us to continue because I have seen myself what these professional theologians and pastors, the depth of their faith, the depth of their hearts, and they go back home to teach and instruct and form others. We have to continue the dialogues in small groups because that's how you get to the depth of things. in order to do what Kim said, to not see the church as it is, a static reality with defined boundaries, but to see the church as Christ is dreaming. And this is what Francis is doing in the dream he gives. The Christ has a vision, the risen Christ has a vision for us. It's the fullness of his vision of the Father's heart. Today, as we filmed this, we read at Mass the pericope when Jesus tells to Simon Peter, go out further to the deep for fish. And what we have to do as disciples of Jesus is going to the deepest part of our tradition, which is the mystery that God is alive, that God is in love, and that God is in love with us, his creation. And he asks us to be co-creators with him of a future we can't see quite yet, but we have a hint of it in the person of Jesus.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. You know, when Methodists come together at conference, there's a tradition that they sing a hymn entitled "And Are We Yet Alive?" And there's not a question mark at the end of that, by the way. It's a statement. I'll read a part of it because you've all mentioned the Wesley hymns, and I think this is a beautiful hymn. It's preserved by power divine to full salvation here. Again, in Jesus' praise we join, and in his sight appear. Remember, this is when they're gathering together after they've been out in itinerating, and they've come back. What troubles have we seen? What mighty conflicts past? Fightings without and fears within since we assembled last. And yet, this is what made me think of it. Yet out of all the Lord hath brought us by his love, and still he doth his help afford and hides our life above. I just was reminded of that as we were talking today, and the richness of the dialogue and the friendship and the love, and truly being hidden, our lives hidden in Christ together. And I want to thank each of you for being a part of this. I hope that many people watch this episode of Secondhand Religion. It has been a wonderfully rich conversation. Thank you so much.